I know some of you here don't know me. I've been here 7 years, but many who do have often given me the feedback, which I like hearing. Oh, Father Norm, you're such a positive person. You seem to always look for the good and see the good and just enter into each day with great gratitude. I would say that's true most of the time, not all of the time, for any of us too. The reason I bring that up is last night, one of the pipes burst in our rectory. And of course, all the water had to be shut off. We couldn't wash, we couldn't bathe, couldn't do a whole lot of things. And it was real cold in the rectory because it's colder, and that's an old rectory built in the 1870s. And so I had to wear all my clothes to bed and couldn't shower, you know. And I got humor in it for a moment, but I got over the humor part. And I started to grumble. I felt real grouchy, and part of it even felt good. But I was grumbling about that. I'm not going to ask any of the rest of you who have stories how the last couple days or nights have been. But I know it's been difficult. And so inside, kind of complaining, even this morning, you know, when we were getting things together and somebody came to help out, I was still irked. But I was able to fake it, in this case, outwardly and inwardly still, why today of all days? And of course, then I thought, well, after I had breakfast and had some of these stirrings, that I needed to start reflecting on my homily. If those who know me know that sometimes I think a little bit about it sooner, days before, but usually the last day it kind of comes together. I pray, Holy Spirit, help, you know. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to go reflect on my homily and see what I'm going to say to the good folks here tonight. And as I reflected on the gospel and looking at it, I thought, well, what a wonderful example in Mary and Joseph. Because look at their life. There they were, you know, living their own life, their own way, looking forward to marriage, and all that went out the window. And they do come together, and they do realize they're to give birth to the Messiah. But what? She's got to go, they got to go together for the census because the taxes are being raised, and they got to go miles to Bethlehem, and she's 9 months pregnant. And can't you even imagine, Mary might say, Lord, this is your kid. Why are you making it so hard? They had a lot of reason to grumble. And so going through that, and then we know the story, no room in the inn, and then you go to the cave where the stable, and it's smelly animals, and it's awful in many ways. We paint it so beautiful and peaceful. It had to be kind of harried and hurried and a certain chaos. And yet we see, and they probably had their moments too. They don't tell you that part of the story. But overall, a sense of peace and hope and joy in knowing what was happening. Their focus was on doing God's will. Their focus was on Jesus, this baby they were bringing to birth. And of course, I was thinking about all the different things I would tell you people about this. And then, of course, it's like there was a God moment that God got through to me. And, well, hey, Norm, you're probably the one right now who needs to hear this the most. In your grumbling and your attitude, give a break. Okay, there was a water break, there were a few things. This isn't that big a deal when you compare to what they went through and what a whole lot of other people are going through in our country and our world. And so, sure enough, thankfully, that God did break through and said, and he usually does this for me too. A lot of times my homilies are about, okay, Lord, what do I need to hear? And then I can pass it on. But I need to hear it too. And so that kind of gave me a certain peace, a certain calm, and a certain gratitude. Yeah. So often in our lives, whether the last few days or other times, we can focus on what's going wrong in our world, in ourselves, in our families. And there's things we got to look at. But sometimes we fail to see and celebrate what's good in our world, What's good in us? What's good in the many people around us that aren't going to make headlines? And so I started to think about gratitude. And then something else came to mind. Many of you who've been around these years know this. Because it didn't come to me right away. I thought, oh, gratitude. This very night, there's a midnight mass. Back in 1965, I'm a freshman at the University of Akron. I had some friends influence me to looking into the Catholic faith. This very night, midnight mass, 1965, I received communion for the first time in the Catholic Church. And I can remember 57 years ago, I can remember like it was yesterday. You know, we all have those moments in life that hopefully stay with us, that we remember when we need to remember them. And I remember how awestruck I was. I grew up in a tradition and didn't go to church for a long time. And that sense of Christ really coming to nourish me, us, to feed me with his very life, that was a whole new concept for me. And it touched me deeply. I had a priest who really helped me to see, wow, can there be any greater gift than that to reflect? And also, I remember at that time in tears saying, Lord, I hope I never, ever take you for granted. I can tell you in 57 years, sometimes I have taken him for granted. We probably all have. And so coming to this midnight mass and remembering again, memory is important, to remember something good that touches us, those God experiences. And so this morning, I went from, tears because things weren't going my way, to tears of gratitude. Lord, you're so good. Help me, help all of us to center more on you than on what's wrong with the weather. Again, legitimate issues, but come back to you for greatest source of peace and joy. And so that happened. And I think for all of us, and when I speak of Eucharist, it's not only, but it is fundamentally the communion. The Lord wants to be part of us and in us today. We remember 2,000 years ago, but right here, right now, where we are, Jesus saying, I love you, I want to be part of you, I want to be your deepest nourishment. It's spiritual. You can have the material, you can have the wealth and all of that, but we know, maybe we don't know, our deepest hunger is for the spiritual, the meaning, the hope, the purpose, the love that he can ultimately bring that we find nowhere else in our restlessness. And seeing that also includes his word. That when we hear that word, we've said this before, this is Christ. He is the word speaking to us. And I need him speaking to me here, and we need him speaking to us in our everyday lives, especially when we maybe get in the grumbles. And then, of course, to recognize the Spirit in one another. He calls us together in community. We're to be Christ for one another. That December 24th, 1965, moving to the 25th, not only did I receive communion, but afterward there was a group of young adults. We were at the College Newman Center, and they gave me gifts, and they were praying for me. They were there, and we got together, and that meant so much because we not only need faith, we need faith community. And that was there to touch me for the rest of my life. And I'm so glad for that. And I'm so glad I remembered that today with the Lord's help instead of getting bogged down in everything else. And as I say that, maybe another thing that we need to look at is part of that story of why God chose Mary and Joseph. Why they were from a small, poor country, a poor section of that country. They were considered a peasant family. I mean, why would God choose them? And here, I want to share another story some of you may have heard. This goes back to 1967, 55 years ago, 2 years after I was ordained, or 2 years after I was baptized. And a whole group of us went out Christmas caroling around the University of Akron. And in that area, there tended to be kind of a poor neighborhood around, and we wanted to go out. And the last place we went to was a home, and it was pretty dilapidated. I think many of those homes were demolished soon thereafter. But too often, too many people displaced. But anyway, we went there. And I remember we were given information getting to this final house. And the person in there, basically summing it up, they were telling us he was poor, he was black, and he was old. Poor, black, and old. In our culture then, and maybe somewhat now even, we don't want to always admit it, someone could be seen as less than. And I think in a way, we didn't do that consciously, but when we went to his house, I think there was a sense of, look what we, these wonderful students at the University of Akron Catholic, can do for this poor guy. Isn't it wonderful that we're at his house? I guess that was okay to think about, but maybe not humble enough. But the Lord spoke in that situation. Because we got there, and we sang songs, and we gave him some fruit, and and as I said, he was blind, and I think we felt good, which was a good feeling, reaching out and touching the life of another human being with love. That's what this feast day is all about. But then he said to us, he said, "Can you stay for a moment?" We said, "Sure." He went in his other room. He came back out with a saw. A saw. I don't know what he was going to do with the saw, but there he was, and we weren't worried. It wasn't that. We just didn't know what he was going to do. Well, he sat down and he took that saw, and he had some other instrument or whatever he had. He bent the saw back and forth in his blindness, in his chair, in his old age, and played for us Silent Night. Often when I hear Silent Night, I remember that night. I remember his gift to us, humbling us. Yeah, he gave so much to us. We didn't recognize that at first. And boy, to stay mindful of that. He might have been thought of as a peasant in our day. Anything was further from the truth. He was a witness to the Lord, like Mary and Joseph. Like the people in every age, the saints we hear about, the stories, people even now in difficult odds, hearing about people in the Ukraine with great hope and prayer and peace and praying for people who are hating them. Yeah. We need to be mindful of them, appreciating them, being inspired by them, as I think I was then and I am now. Jesus, the light that we heard that first reading that brings us out of darkness. Yeah, that blind man wasn't in as much darkness as we were or as we can all get into. He knew the light. The light was in here, and he radiated it that night. And I remember it powerfully 55 years later. So, as we go forth, the Lord calls all of us, humbles us, and reminds us. He wants to be present to us in our littleness, in what we think may be our inadequacies. And he wants us clearly in our culture to give witness when too many other people are put down for this reason or that reason. To say, wait a second. Every human being is made in the image and likeness of God. Every human being can radiate light. And even the people who don't, we need not to hate them, but to pray for them. And so tonight as we're here, let's take a quiet moment and see what the Lord wants to say to our hearts when we sell ourselves short or we sell others short. And see, yeah, Lord, help us to see one another through your eyes and love one another with your heart. Take that quiet moment.